Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're really digging into a pretty central part of Heartfelt Harmony. We're zoning in on episode 11, that's the one called The Crucible, the ripple effect. And we're not just looking at the story itself, but trying to connect Nyla and Brody's whole journey to something bigger. This idea called the art of resilience, learning from setbacks and embracing new beginnings.
Exactly. That's the goal today. We want to pull out those core insights, how people, how whole communities face these massive challenges and not just survive them, but actually somehow turn that adversity into real positive change, widespread change. So yeah, we're looking at this story crisis, courage, these huge ripple effects, but through that lens of resilience. It's about watching that transformation, isn't it? From being totally tested to, well, becoming this source of inspiration.
Okay, let's unpack that. So we start with the Crucible. The source material really paints it as this intense testing ground for strength, for spirit. And the first thing that hits you right away in episode 11 is this onset of crisis. The phrase used is everything at risk. So maybe let's start there. What exactly was this major crisis, and how did the source really hammer home that feeling of everything is at risk?
Well, the crisis, the one episode 11 just throws us into, it was the Great Weir collapsing, suddenly, catastrophically. And the source doesn't pull punches. It calls it the Heartland's lifeline shattered. I mean, think about that. This weir wasn't just some dam, it was their main source for everything. Irrigation, drinking water, even their power, for generations. So its destruction, that wasn't just a problem, it was an immediate existential threat to the whole Central Valley community. When the source says everything is at risk, it's not being dramatic, it means it. We saw it right away. No safe drinking water, huge areas of farmland just scorched, gone, the hydropower cut off. Lights out, workshops silent. Yeah, the actual foundation of how they lived was just gone overnight.
Wow, okay, so everything at risk isn't just like a catchy phrase here. It sounds like it really means a complete fundamental threat to their entire way of life, not just an inconvenience. So what did that really mean? What were the layers of threat they faced, beyond just, the immediate lack of water?
Oh, it went so much deeper than the practical stuff, although that was terrifying enough. When everything is at risk, it means the whole structure of their society, which was built around that we're always being there, just started falling apart. The source actually details how old land treaties, ones that depended on water sharing, suddenly became huge points of conflict. Trust started breaking down between groups. Economically, disaster. Their whole farming industry, the thing that drove their economy, their trade, their prosperity, wiped out. But even deeper, it hit their identity. The weir wasn't just concrete and water, it was a symbol of their unity, their history, their connection to the land, maybe even spiritual for some. So its destruction, it challenged everything. Their history, their security, the wisdom of their ancestors. It was a threat to their past, their present, and definitely their future, all at once.
Right. So if the threat is that big, what kind of immediate pressure, psychologically and practically, does that put on the leaders, on Nyla and Brody? Not just them, but on every single person in that community. How did the story show this turning into, daily fear and impossible choices?
For Nyla and Brody, the wait must have been unbelievable. The source really captures that, Their sleepless nights, the strain on their faces. You have to imagine, just hours after the collapse, they're facing these awful choices. Do we use the tiny bit of water left for drinking, or try to save a few last patches of crops, knowing that choosing one means sacrificing the other? There's that one scene, isn't there, where Brody's just staring at the dry channels. And he's wrestling with this guilt because he'd argued for delaying maintenance on the weir. And Nyla, she felt that crushing public despair, knowing every decision was literally life or death for people she knew personally. And yet they had to look calm. They had to project this strength, even when they were probably falling apart inside.
And for everyone else, that constant dread you mentioned, it must have been almost paralyzing. Did the source show how people were trying to cope? Or maybe moments where that fear almost boiled over into panic or fighting before Nyla and Brody could step in?
Oh, that dread was thick. You could feel it. The source definitely shows those early signs of breakdown. Fear-driven hoarding, people grabbing whatever they could from the market, whispers about families just packing up and leaving, heading for greener places. There was even that really tense moment over the last PP up, working well, remember? Before Nyla and Brody managed to de-escalate it, people's daily worries became so basic, so raw. Where's the next drink coming from? Will my parents survive the heat? Should we just run now? Coping was desperate. Families sharing the little water they had, neighbors pooling food, impromptu prayer meetings, little things. But the story makes it clear, collective action was really fragile, right on the edge of collapsing. It was this balance between despair and just desperate hope for someone to lead. It really tested their collective spirit, didn't it? make them face their biggest fears, rethink everything.
Which brings us right to the heart of this crucible, this partnership under duress. Focusing on Nyla and Brody's test. The source explicitly says the crisis tests the strength of the partnership. How did that massive pressure actually affect how they work together, their communication, that vital trust between them?
Yeah, this is where you really saw their individual strengths, but also their vulnerabilities come out. The crisis definitely pushed their communication right to the edge. We see those moments of friction. Nyla may be more focused on the immediate practical needs, clashing with Brody's tendency to think more long-term, strategically. Even in a crisis, I remember that scene where Nyla just snaps at Brody about some delayed supplies. She's totally overwhelmed. And Brody has to calmly explain he was off securing this absolutely critical filtration system they needed. It wasn't malice between them, just raw stress exposing their different styles. But that's also where their trust was tested, and importantly, where it held. Despite the friction, they never doubted each other's commitment or integrity. They had to learn to talk with, brutal honesty, even when it was hard. The stakes were just too high. That shared vision they started with, they got stripped right down to basics, survival. And that demanded a new, deeper level of shared commitment.
It sounds like it's not just about what they did, but who they were becoming under that pressure. The source mentions they were forced to dig deep and find new reserves of courage. Does that mean confronting specific personal weaknesses or past mistakes? Did the episode give us glimpses into that, or was it more just a general need to be brave?
That's a really sharp point, and the source did go into it. Digging deep wasn't just generic bravery, it was very personal for both of them. For Brody, it was absolutely about confronting his fear of failure, especially tied to his earlier calls about the weir's maintenance. He had this perfectionist streak, apparently. He had to overcome that, learn to make tough calls with incomplete information, knowing he might be wrong, but they had to move forward. Nyla, on the other hand, she'd always relied on her logic, her intellect, problem solving. This crisis pushed her towards a different kind of courage, more emotional, more empathetic. The courage to stand in front of a community that's grieving, that's terrified, and offer not just plans, but real solace, real hope, even when maybe her own hope was flickering. It really was a personal crucible for both of them, refining their leadership by making them face their own insecurities and lead from a place of, hard-won conviction.
So when the source then says they rise to the challenge, it's obviously meaning way more than just getting through it. What does that imply about how they approach the crisis beyond just hanging on?
Rising to the challenge in this episode meant they shifted gears, from just reacting, putting out fires, to actively trying to shape what came next. So instead of just rationing the little water they had left, Nyla and Brody were leading teams out to look for totally new water sources, like hidden mountain springs. They didn't just mourn the lost farms, they started planning how to grow completely different crops. These tougher, drought-resistant grains in new areas, changing their whole agricultural strategy on the fly. It implies they went from defense to offense, real leadership. Not just enduring the crisis, but actively creating solutions, creating opportunities where it looked like there were none. They didn't just survive, they started inventing a new way forward for everyone.
And this isn't all just about Nyla and Brody, is it? The source is clear that the crisis also tests the resilience of the community. So not just individual leaders being strong, but that collective ability to take the hits, adapt, and keep going together.
Precisely. Individual strength is vital, sure, but it's only one piece. Community resilience, like we see in episode 11, it's about that whole network. The relationships, neighbors, helping neighbors, sacrificing for each other. That shared belief that they can get through it together. We see examples, right? Like those elder artisans. Their craft depended on minerals from the weir's water. Gone. But instead of just giving up, they started figuring out how to use their skills differently. They started devising these clever little water filters for families using well water. Amazing ingenuity. Or the young people, who were probably feeling pretty hopeless at first. They started organizing patrols to guard the water supplies, taking collective responsibility. It's about how the whole community absorbs the shock, changes its routines, adapts to the new reality, and manages to stick together, making sure one person's despair doesn't drag everyone down.
And it feels like Nyla and Brody's partnership strength would be totally connected to this, right? Their leadership affects community resilience, but the community's response must also affect them.
Absolutely. It's a two-way street, a dynamic feedback loop, really. Nyla and Brody's steady, unified leadership. That gave the community a structure, a focus point for their own resilience. When people saw their leaders, against all odds, coming up with plans, working non-stop, together, it built confidence. It gave people a reason to believe their own efforts mattered. But it works the other way too. The community's willingness to trust them, to work together, to come up with their own solutions like those artisans that empowered Nyla and Brody. It gave them the buy-in they needed, the collective energy to actually implement those bold new policies. It showed their vision wasn't just theirs, it was shared. It's a really powerful example of how good leadership and a resilient community build each other up.
So as this crisis was unfolding, what were some of those early signs of strain, or maybe importantly, those first glimmers of hope that started to emerge? That's what really drives the tension in the episode.
Oh, the strain was immediate and palpable in those first days. The source shows us, empty market stalls, silent workshops, people pulling back, isolated in their fear. There were definitely moments where unity frayed. That fight over the well, like we mentioned, some families hoarding food initially, it felt like a race against time, really. Social bonds were stretching thin under the pressure of scarcity and just pure uncertainty. But then, amidst all that darkness, you started seeing these little sparks, glimmers of hope, small at first, but growing. The young people, inspired by Brody's determination to find water, they formed their own search parties. Remember Alara, the elder who was initially really skeptical of Nyla's more radical ideas? She publicly stood up and said, no, we need this change. That brought different generations together. These small acts of defiance against despair, these first steps towards working together again, they were crucial. They showed the community could rally. They were the first seeds, really, of that ripple effect to come.
And speaking of seeds, it's those small acts, those glimmers, that plant the seeds for something much bigger, right? Which takes us perfectly into the next phase, how those seeds grow into this huge ripple effect we see later in episode 11. Moving from policy to profound change. The first step seems to be policies taking shape, the seeds of transformation. The source says Nyla and Brody's courage turned into actual policies. How did that even work? Especially under that constant crisis pressure where every decision had immediate fallout.
Right, this is where their inner strength met the outer chaos head on. And the source makes it really clear. Policymaking wasn't neat and tidy, it was messy, iterative, reactive. Take the first water allocation directive. It was harsh, super strict rationing, just enough to survive, basically. But Nyla and Brody saw pretty quickly that it was causing resentment, maybe even despair. So they didn't just stick with it, they refined it, added the Community Water Rationing Committee, gave every family a voice, made it fairer, more transparent, even if the amount of water was still tiny. That's courage in action, isn't it? The courage to say, okay, our first try wasn't perfect, to listen and to adapt right there in the middle of it all. We also saw it with the Emergency Agricultural Repurposing Act. Initially, it involved tough measures, like burning those fields, painful. But it evolved into this plan for cultivating that hardy sunseed crop on new terraced lands, a huge shift, conceived and pushed through under unbelievable pressure.
So thinking about the ripple effects later, these policies weren't just about immediate survival, were they? There must have been a deeper strategy behind them, aiming for something more sustainable, more systemic, not just plugging holes in the dam, so to speak. What was that longer view?
Absolutely. That ripple effect wasn't just luck. It grew directly from that deeper strategic thinking embedded in their policies. The water rationing wasn't just about saving water. It was designed to make people more resourceful, to push innovation in conservation at the household level, self-sufficiency, and switching crops with the Agricultural Act. That wasn't just finding something that would grow. It was about diversifying their entire food source, making them less vulnerable to one single point of failure like the Weir had been. Nyla and Brody were consciously trying to build a new foundation, a post-Weir society that was just fundamentally stronger, more sustainable, more adaptable. Their vision was about preventing future disasters like this, creating a community that could handle environmental shifts. They were thinking generations ahead, not just about the next day.
And we have to remember, even brilliant policies would hit roadblocks, right? Resistance, implementation challenges. The source must have shown how Nyla and Brody needed even more resilience, more adaptability to navigate that.
Oh, absolutely. The resistance was real. You saw it immediately with the water rationing. Families cried out, what about the elderly who needed certain plants for medicine? What about the blacksmiths needing water for their forges? Real valid concerns. Nyla and Brody had to hold meeting after meeting, not just explaining, but really listening, absorbing the anger, the fear, and then adjusting the policies where they could without losing the core goal. And the sunseed idea. A lot of the traditional farmers were deeply skeptical. They trusted the crops their families had grown for generations. Brody had to get out there himself, work alongside them, show them the techniques. point to the small, early successes, proved that this new way, while different, offered real hope. That took huge adaptability, constant negotiation, and just plain stubborn resilience to push past that initial friction and get people on board. It was a constant battle against cynicism, against habit.
And then we start to see the payoff, the positive ripple effects. First locally, right there on their community, and then spreading beyond. What did those immediate impacts look like, right there in the Central Valley? Can you give us some concrete examples from the episode?
Within their own community, those ripples were, well, incredibly tangible and deeply felt. The most immediate thing was just a slow return to stability. Once the new water rationing system, the one with community input, was working, that desperate scramble stopped. Hoarding eased up. You saw organized water lines. It brought back a sense of order, a feeling of shared purpose, even in hardship. Economically, those new sunseed crops, though tough to grow, started yielding their first harvests. A real glimmer of hope for farmers who thought they'd lost everything. That underlying fear that had gripped everyone. It slowly started to recede, replaced by this quiet determination. And crucially, you saw trust in Nyla and Brody being restored. People saw their courage actually leading to real, measurable improvements, those silent workshops. They started humming again, slowly, as artisans found new materials, new methods suited to the drier reality.
But the source makes a point of saying, and beyond, that the impact went further than just their own valley. How does that work? How do these ripples spread out? It's just inspiration? Or people copying policies? Sharing knowledge? What did the episode suggest?
It seemed like a mix of all those things, creating this network effect. The beyond part really showed up when neighboring communities, maybe facing their own different challenges, long droughts, climate shifts, not necessarily a weir collapse, started sending people over. And they weren't just coming for handouts, they were coming for knowledge. Episode 11 showed how news about the sunseed and how resilient it was started to travel. Other places wanted seeds, wanted to learn how to grow it. The success of that community water rationing committee inspired other towns to try similar participatory ways of managing resources. The Central Valley basically became this living model. Proof that a community, through sheer will and smart policy, could not only survive the catastrophe but actually come out stronger. It was like a beacon, sparking others to copy policies, share techniques. It showed what was possible.
And ripple effects often have these unexpected side benefits too, don't they? Things nobody planned for, but that happen organically. Did the episode show any of those?
It did, and that was one of the really cool parts. One great example was that traditional craft, sky weaving. It used river reeds that were gone after the weir collapse. The weavers were devastated. But then, this new plant, desert bloom, started thriving in the drier conditions created by the new agriculture. The weavers adapted. They discovered that desert bloom fibers were actually stronger, held dye better. It led to this total renaissance of their art, and this new textile became a valuable trade good. Unexpected economic growth from a sector everyone thought was finished. Another one was new trade routes. The old river routes were useless. So Nyla and Brody had to figure out land routes to get to those mountain springs. And doing that, they inadvertently opened up trade with these isolated settlements they'd never really connected with before, forging new alliances, new commerce. These kinds of organic multiplying benefits really show how effective change doesn't just solve the initial problem. It creates fertile ground for more good things to happen, often in ways nobody predicted.
Which brings us to those success stories. Inspiration in action. The source specifically highlights stories from individuals and organizations. Why are those specific, concrete examples so vital in a story about change like this? They make that abstract ripple effect feel real, don't they?
They're absolutely critical. Without them, ripple effect is just a concept, just words. Episode 11 made it real by showing us people like Maeve, remember her? The old weaver who was so skeptical at first. She turned her despair into innovation with the desert bloom. Her story became like a local legend. It showed everyone that adapting wasn't just about surviving, it could lead to new opportunities. Or the Ridgeback Collective. These farmers who used to be independent, maybe even rivals, who came together under the new cooperative model Nyla and Brody introduced. Their success harvesting that first big sunseed crop together that showed the power of unity, of sharing the risk. These tangible examples were proof. Proof that the policies, the community's hard work, were actually making a difference in people's lives. They put a human face on the whole idea of transformation, made it relatable, inspiring.
And it's not just showing success, but how Nyla and Brody's actions sparked others. Leading by example seems key here.
It's the ultimate proof of their leadership, isn't it? Nyla and Brody didn't just sit in an office issuing orders. Nyla was out there helping design the new water systems. Brody was literally working in the sunseed fields alongside the farmers. They weren't just leaders, they were participants. That kind of authentic, hands-on approach, it resonates deeply. So other communities, even other people within the valley, didn't just sit back and admire them. They started asking, okay, if they can overcome that with courage and vision, what problems can we tackle?
It spurred local inventors to create new water-saving gadgets. It pushed old trade guilds to reinvent themselves. It encouraged isolated families to reconnect. Leading by example creates this amazing multiplier effect. It turns passive onlookers into active problem solvers. And that's fundamental if you want change to actually stick.
So, thinking about the diversity of these success stories, the source mentions individuals and organizations. It suggests the impact wasn't just limited to water and farming, right? It spread wider.
Exactly. The episode made a point of showing that. It wasn't just about the immediate crisis. We saw that group, the Silent Watchers, who cared for local wildlife. They were inspired by Nyla and Brody's resourcefulness. So they developed new ways to get water to animals without disturbing them, which then, apparently, spurred new drone tech for tracking the ecosystem. Really cool side effect. Even the Storykeepers Guild. Their job was reciting ancient history. They started documenting the community's current experiences, turning the crisis itself into this new epic story of resilience. That helped unite people, preserve what they were going through. This diversity shows that the core principles, resilience, collaboration, good policy, community power, they aren't specific to one problem. They can spark positive change anywhere, in any sector, addressing all sorts of different challenges.
This leads us right into the power of grassroots movements. The source really stresses the far-reaching impact of these kinds of movements. How does that differ from, say, a more top-down approach? What's special about community-led initiatives when it comes to creating change that lasts?
Yeah, that's a really key distinction, and episode 11 illustrates it so well. A top-down fix might have been, I don't know, flying in engineers from outside to impose some standardized water system, maybe faster in the short term. But those kinds of solutions often fail because they don't understand the local reality. They can feel imposed, people resent them, don't feel any ownership. Grassroots movements, though, they bubble up from the lived experience of the people facing the problem. In the Central Valley, wasn't Nyla and Brody dictating every single move. Their leadership created the space for the community to organize itself. You saw families working together, digging wells, local folks tinkering, improvising filters, neighbors forming water watch groups. The strength of grassroots is its authenticity. It comes from real need. And it creates this deep sense of ownership. Because the solutions are developed by the community for the community, people are way more invested in making them work, in adapting them. That's what makes the change stick. It's their solution, not someone else's.
So that authenticity, that ownership, that direct engagement, that's what makes these grassroots efforts, like the ones Nyla and Brody sparked, really resonate and last.
Exactly right. When it's truly grassroots, it's not some abstract plan dropped from above. It's our idea, our solution, born from our struggle. The episode shows this with those water reclamation teams, remember? The groups that salvaged equipment from the ruined weir. Tough, dangerous work. They weren't getting paid overtime for that. They were driven by this powerful sense of ownership over their own future. Authenticity meant Nyla and Brody's policies actually made sense to people because they addressed real, immediate needs and values. And direct engagement meant the solutions were practical. They could be tweaked based on what was actually happening on the ground, in specific homes or workshops. It creates this positive cycle. People feel empowered, so they get more engaged. And engaged people make change last because they feel personally connected to it. They see their own contribution and success.
And if we connect this back to Nyla and Brody's whole journey, starting with the local crisis, but eventually inspiring change far beyond, that really feels like a classic example of how grassroots efforts can grow organically.
It really is a perfect archetype. Their first efforts were hyper-local, desperate almost. Get drinking water, save the nearest fields. But as their solutions started working, as that spirit of collective action really caught on, it became this powerful demonstration, proof that could be done. And the success didn't need some big top-down scaling strategy. The inspiration just spread naturally. Traveling merchants who might have avoided the valley at first started carrying stories. Tales of the Sunseed, the water reclamation teams. That visible success created this pull. Other communities, facing their own problems, sent people to learn, not just from Nyla and Brody, but from the regular citizens of the Central Valley. That kind of organic scaling, driven by real need and proven success from the ground up. It's often much stronger, much more resilient than any kind of forced expansion from the top could ever be. It shows the power of a good idea, nurtured locally, finding its own way.
And all of this is part of what the Source calls a larger journey. And within that journey, it highlights the importance of celebrating small victories. Why is that so crucial? Especially when you're facing something as huge as the weir collapsing. These small wins aren't just symbolic gestures, are they?
Oh, they're absolutely essential. They're like psychological fuel. Seriously. When you're fighting a battle that huge, that long, the end goal, rebuilding everything, restoring the valley, can feel impossibly far away, maybe even unreachable. If that's all you focus on, it's so easy to get overwhelmed, to burn out. Episode 11 showed brilliantly how those small victories acted as vital boosts to morale. Seeing the very first sunseed sprout push through the dry earth after weeks of hoping and working, that wasn't just a plant, it was like defiance, it was tangible hope. Or when they successfully purified the water from one new well just enough for a few homes, they apparently had this small impromptu celebration, a shared meal. These tiny wins are concrete proof of progress. They're markers that say, look, we are moving forward, what we're doing is making a difference. They break down the overwhelming into manageable, celebrated steps.
So acknowledging those smaller successes is what keeps people going. It prevents burnout, reinforces that the effort is worthwhile. It really is fuel for the journey.
Exactly. It's vital fuel. Every small win is a boost, a psychological reward that validates all the hard work, the sacrifices. It fights back against that awful feeling of being stuck. Remember when the water reclamation teams finally managed to pull that huge thing gear out of the weir's wreckage? Battered but whole. The Source says the whole thing was just right. Now that gear didn't solve the water crisis, not by itself, but it was something real, a concrete achievement, a symbol that progress was coming. That kind of continuous positive reinforcement is just crucial for keeping people committed, keeping cynicism away, and making sure everyone stays energized for the long haul. It makes people feel like their part matters.
And the Source underlines that these victories aren't the end. They're just steps in this ongoing process, which frames the whole thing as continuous, needing sustained effort and adaptability.
That's such a deep insight, and the episode really nailed it. Resilience isn't a one-off thing. It's not a destination. It's dynamic, ongoing. Celebrating the small wins, acknowledge progress, yes, but without limiting yourself, without falling into that constant improvement, the larger journey of rebuilding the depth. For the Central Valley, every patch of sun is a learning opportunity. Every new water source is like figuring out better conservation. It means understanding that every single better capacity, find ways to shrink the next year. It reinforces that mindset that sustains independence, the journey of transformation,
That's a really perfect way to transition into our final section here. The art of resilience, learning and beginning anew. This is the big idea, the framework that Nyla and Brody's journey illustrates so powerfully. So how do we define resilience in this context, going beyond just, bouncing back?
Right. In this context, resilience is way more than just getting back to where you were before the crisis hit. It's that deeper capacity to not just recover, but to truly adapt to the new reality and challenge. And crucially, to actually grow stronger, become more innovative because of the adversity. It's about bouncing forward, being fundamentally changed, and better by next year. For the Central Valley, it wasn't about just dreaming of rebuilding the old year exactly as it was. It was about envisioning and then building something new, a decentralized water system, for instance. It involves mental toughness, sure, but also emotional intelligence and this radical ability to spot opportunity even when things are completely different.
And Nyla and Brody's whole story in the Crucible ripple effect really serves as a living demonstration of this art, its resilience in action.
Absolutely. Everything they did throughout that crisis, from facing down the immediate disaster to painstakingly creating those adaptable policies like the Sunseed Plan, to inspiring people like Maybe and groups like the Ridgeback Collective, it embodies those principles. They didn't just endure, they actively learned from every single setback. They adapted their entire community's way of life, and they ended up driving this profound positive change, both locally and beyond. Their story isn't just about survival. It shows that resilience isn't some passive quality you either have or don't. It's an active practice, an art form, like the title says. A practice for courage, collaboration, and ultimately self-growth.
One of the key parts of this art is learning from setbacks. It's definitely more than just recovery, isn't it? It sounds like
being deliberate, critical thinking, even when things aren't going well. A good example would be at maybe Nyla's initial hesitation to fully bring the Elven Council to the unsolicited rapid follow. It led to early communication problems. But after some public pushback on money, she didn't just ignore it or respond to initial response. And then acting on what she saw. She turned from real stability into a stronger, more inclusive way of making decisions. Well, we start dissecting what happened, why it failed, what was our own blind spots, unexpected reactions, and honestly looking at the weaknesses of the plan or how it was carried out. It turns those failures into valuable helps you avoid making the same mistake again. Turns hardship into wisdom.
And those lessons learned then lead directly to adapting, innovating, and growing. So setbacks aren't just defeats, they actually become stepping stones. Can you think of another example from the episode where a setback directly sparked an innovative solution?
Oh, definitely. Think about their first attempts to filter that muddy reservoir water early on. Their initial homemade filters, they failed badly. People got sick. Despair deepened. That was a huge, painful setback. But instead of just giving up on filtration, that failure pushed Brody to reach out to the Skywalkers. Remember them? That reclusive mountain group with deep knowledge about crystals and purification. That collaboration, which happened because the first attempt failed so badly, led to the invention of the crystal beam filters. This was a totally new, really effective, sustainable way to get clean water. It revolutionized things for them. That innovation likely wouldn't have happened without the pressure and urgency created by that first setback. It's a powerful example of how adversity, if you're willing to learn from it, can actually trigger breakthroughs.
And for Nyla and Brody, developing those policies, they must have been constantly learning from limitations, from things that didn't quite work, tweaking their approach based on what was happening on the ground.
Without a doubt. You can picture them rolling out an early version of a policy, maybe that agricultural track. And then they hit unexpected snags. Maybe the soil in one area wasn't right for the sunseed. Maybe some farmers just refused to try the new method. Their commitment to resilience meant they couldn't just ignore that. They had to have a process for reflection, analyzing what went wrong, getting direct, probably sometimes blunt, feedback from the people doing the work, and then relentlessly refining the approach. That iterative learning loop adjusts, improves based on real results, not just theory that's a hallmark of effective leadership in a crisis. It's absolutely central to this art of resilience. It's about continuous improvement, not pretending you've got a perfect first time.
And there's that really beautiful leverage. Embracing the beginnings. This feels crucial. It's about moving forward after the hardship, not just back to how things were, but to something transformed, something maybe even stronger. How did the community really embrace a new beginning?
This is maybe the ultimate expression of resilience. Embracing the beginning wasn't about pretending the fear disaster never happened or trying to recreate the past exactly. It was about acknowledging deeply that the crisis had changed their land, changed their perspective, irrevocably. And it meant seizing the opportunity that came out of that disruption to build something fundamentally better, stronger, more aligned with their shared values. So the community, Nyla and Brody leading, committed to that decentralized water network of wells, aqueducts making them less vulnerable. They fully embraced sustainable dry land farming as their new normal, aiming for long-term goals. It showed this willingness to let go of the old ways, limitations, and really commit to a transformative future. Understanding that the hardship itself had actually forged new strengths, new skills. They weren't just rebuilding, they were reimagining the whole society.
That suggests that the beginnings often come with challenging themselves, change, innovation, rethinking priorities, and finding totally new paths.
That's the amazing paradox of adversity. It often creates the very space needed to found an opportunity. The weir collapsed, stripped away everything non-essential. It forced this intense reevaluation of what really matters. For survival, for community, for the future. It broke down old, rigid structures with a total dependence on the single environment. And that breakdown made room for innovations in water, farming, even governance that might have been impossible to pursue. New beginnings aren't just about recovery, they're about reimagining, reinventing, forging new paths that are often stronger, more aligned with core values than what existed before the crisis. It's turning the rubble into a foundation.
So connecting this idea of embracing new beginnings back to the ripple effects in that larger journey, it really emphasizes that resilience isn't static. It's this dynamic, ongoing process of evolution and positive momentum.
Exactly. The ripple effects show that these new beginnings don't just happen in isolation. They spread outwards, creating more positive change. And the larger journey idea reminds us this isn't a single event with an endpoint. It's ongoing, it's dynamic. Resilience for the Central Valley became their learning way of operating. It's about keeping that positive forward momentum going, constantly learning, adapting, seeing new possibilities. It ensures that the next challenge, even a smaller one, becomes another chance to evolve, to grow. It creates this self-sustaining wave of positive transformation that just keeps shaping their future.
What an incredible journey we traced today. From that brutal crucible when the weir collapsed, all the way to those expansive ripple effects that reshape the Central Valley. All of it anchored by the core values of transition by Nyla and Brody, and really by their entire community.
We really have. We've seen the power of partnership under extreme pressure, the amazing impact that grassroots movements can have when they start with courage, and why it's so important to celebrate those small wins along the way. Keeps you going. It's just a really compelling picture of this enduring art of resilience, learning from setbacks, and having the courage to embrace completely new beginnings.
Okay, so here's a little riddle for you, our listeners, to think about after this deep dive. I can be broken, yet I protect. I can be stretched, yet I grow. I thrive in adversity, and I lead to new freedom.
And thinking about Nyla and Brody and that incredible journey, maybe reflect on this. What's one tough situation you faced where learning from a setback actually allowed you to embrace it? And maybe just as importantly, what small victory in that experience, no matter how tiny it is, did you manage to celebrate?
Thank you so much for joining us on this continued deep dive into Heartfelt Harmony. If you enjoyed this and want more, please do like, subscribe, and maybe comment with a heart.